So you kind of got what I was going for there. It's a lot of noise, a lot of chaos, and then this is supposed to be relaxing rain sounds to bring us back down. Anyone spends any time on social media? There's a lot of noise out there, a lot of opinions. And tonight I'm going to mansplain for all these women on social media around what they're saying about menstrual cycle and contraceptives. But tonight's focus is around strength and conditioning exercise for female-specific considerations. So my background is in sports performance, in strength and conditioning or physical preparation. Physical preparation, strength and conditioning, we have so many terms all describe the same thing, but it is what it describes within. It's to prepare us physically for what we're going to do. So whether that's an athlete for a sport or just someone exercising to be fitter, healthier for everyday life, the principles are the exact same, the concepts are the exact same. So we could talk about a lot of different areas when it comes to that, but tonight I want to talk about the exercise side of things. Some people have been, I should say, in everyday life, have been hesitant to embrace strength training, strength conditioning as it goes in. But ultimately, what strength conditioning, what physical preparation for sport, for life does is two things. It reduces the risk of injury, so it keeps players in the game longer, keeps athletes playing their sport, or keeps us doing the activities we want to do longer, and improves our performance in those tasks. So the key questions I'm going to address tonight are these ones. We're going to look at sex differences. Are males and females different, and how so? If that affects performance, we'll talk about menstrual cycle, contraceptives. Then we want to talk about sex difference exercise. And once we try to ask that question, do females need to train differently to males? So when it comes to the physical preparation side of stuff, that's what I spent the last 4 or 5 years of the PhD looking into that question. I should have studied men. I say this all the time. I would have done quicker with a lot less stress. But I suppose we would have had the same stripes. So, stripes even. It is complex. It's a rabbit hole that I spent far too much time down. It is not a simple matter, but I'm going to try to distill some of the key concepts. So we can go very deep down this rabbit hole. In general, we see that females are underrepresented in sports science research or health research as a whole. And there's a lot of different factors. It's not all because men are smarter people. That's one part of it, but there are some other factors there we have to consider as well. There's far less research in the idea of strength training and hypertrophy-based outcomes for women. A lot of it's just an endurance sport that has been done. But it is a pet peeve of mine when people say that there's been no research done on women. I think that's a cop-out for people just to say, oh, there's no evidence to base our opinion on, so we do what we like. About a third of sports science research to date has been done in women. So if you take, say, the latest kind of estimates, Ellen Cowley's work, that's 34%, 12.5 million people. So that's 4 million participants across all sports science research. So to say that there's no research in females is incorrect. There's plenty of research and data for us to draw from. Now, when it comes to high-level athletes, more advanced, we have much less there. But fundamentally, are males and females different? Yes. Okay, how so?
There are structured ones.
National. Anything else? Hormones. That was hormones. People love to focus on the hormones. So, simple answer is yes. That has become a controversial take, apparently, but it is true. So, there's this term sexual dimorphism. And that just describes that in any species, on average, there's differences between the males and females of that species. In humans, we see it in pretty much every system to a certain degree. We see it in immunology, anatomical structure, endocrinology, cardiovascular system, and even injury rates between males and females. So when that comes to sport or exercise performance, it does have a major effect. So if we take the average male or female that's untrained or moderately trained, and we look at the average differences, we see body composition. We see that males on average have more muscle mass, less fat mass, and a higher proportion of type 2 fibers, see explosive muscle fibers. We see strength, males on average are stronger in both upper and lower body. There are two areas people tend to focus on. But there are other aspects that affect exercise. Males on average have longer and stronger bones, so there is a difference there. We see the same in tendons, males with the higher force class of tendons, respiratory function or VO2 max, cardiovascular function. So we see it in cardiac output, stroke volume is how much blood we pump per beat, and then our hemoglobin concentration. That's what athletes go to altitude to try to induce this hemoglobin concentration. Now, that all builds towards this concept that is called the male advantage in sport. I personally don't like the term advantage because that was kind of a judgment or value on it. It's just a male difference, a sex difference across the sports. And we see that across a multitude of sports, that these anatomical, physiological differences manifest in power differences, that males on average are taller, with longer limbs, stronger bones, more powerful. Now, that sounds like I'm preaching some sort of male dominance patriarchy right there, and that is not to say that. But what it is to say is, on average, there are distinct sex differences in anatomical and physiological structures which have a significant influence on exercise performance. And why that is relevant to some of the questions, and this is what I started thinking about with my research, is we see that strength and conditioning or exercise prescription comes from what they call an androcentric paradigm. But that was a new word to me that I learned a couple of months ago. A reviewer on a nice paper said that. Any sociologists in the room? When you start dealing with sociologists, they speak completely different language. So they said it sounds like an androcentric paradigm, and I was like, oh, it does indeed, yes. So that basically means that how we've gone about prescribing exercise and gone about exercise is based predominantly in male research and prescribed for males. So my thought process was, well, if males and females are so different and we see such a difference in sport performance, and all the research has been done males for males, well, maybe females might need a different approach, or we might need to go about it in a different way when it comes to exercise or physical preparation for sport. So that's where I started to dig into research to look at some of these concepts and see where we are at the moment. So when we think of exercise considerations or female-specific considerations, what's the first thing that seems to spring to mind? Menstrual cycle. I wish I had one of those bingo kind of things. So, what influence does the menstrual cycle have? What do we think? Does it affect performance?
Your temperature regulation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Depends on the person you ask how they feel about it.
does
This is
Everyone's different.
it varies. So, when does menstrual cycle start?
It's always there.
Oh, good. Yes. Yeah. What is day 0 of the menstrual cycle?
just before the first bleed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just before first bleed, and when's it end?
Right before the first
Yeah, same thing. What's the average cycle length? 28 days. Okay. So we've probably seen this graph. I'm not going to, again, overly mansplain the menstrual cycle to people, but essentially we have this 28-day cycle on average. Starts day 0 when the onset of menses, onset of the menstrual bleed. The first half roughly is the follicular phase, leading to ovulation, and then that's when estrogen begins to rise throughout that follicular phase. Ovulation occurs, we've estrogen dips back down, and then progesterone starts to rise, and we have a secondary spike in estrogen in this luteal phase. And that goes, and then at the end of the menstrual cycle, one of two things happen. Pregnancy occurs or pregnancy doesn't occur. Pregnancy occurs, estrogen continues to rise. Pregnancy doesn't occur, we have a shedding of the endometrium and the menstrual bleed occurs. So what we often hear then with the menstrual cycle is in that first half, that follicular phase, estrogen is high, and they say estrogen's anabolic. You'll recover better, you're stronger, you feel better, you have the best training you have, that maybe you should go harder. That's where you should push harder in your menstrual cycle. And the second half then, in that luteal phase, your recovery is down, you might feel a bit kind of crap, a bit sluggish, that maybe that's when you should go easy. Have people heard that idea? This kind of phase-based training? Okay, what's our thoughts?
It depends on the person, I'd say. Individual.
In what way?
Well, sometimes you could feel better towards the end than the start. It depends.
Yeah, so this is the general idea of phase-based training. The issue with it is it looks at a textbook viewpoint of the menstrual cycle. That's what a menstrual cycle looks like in the textbook, and that's what hormones do in a textbook. But the problem is, we have this thing on social media now at the moment, everyone seems to have become an endocrinologist. Endocrinology, and no endocrinologist in the room, is there? No. I'm waiting till the day when there is actually one. It's really complex, would you believe? Hormones are really complex, and they're indiscriminate. They get dumped into the blood and they affect all tissues. So to say, oh, estrogen does this, estrogen's high, therefore this happens, it's too reductionist, it's too simple. That's not how hormones work. We see this textbook view of the menstrual cycle, that this is the way it should be. You know, we have these nice rises and falls. What's a typical, so we say 28 days is a typical menstrual cycle. What's a clinically normal menstrual cycle length, do we think?
21 to 35.
Yeah, so 21 to 35 is clinically normal. We go beyond that, we're into oligomenorrhea, extended menstrual cycle. So if we're thinking that a normal clinical rate is 21 to 35, can we accurately say, or how do we know that things are going on in there? So when it comes to menstrual cycle and performance, we have this thing that I've kind of coined, this dichotomy dilemma. So when we look at the body of evidence, when we've tested and we look and people have tested in the lab, you bring people in, do a battery of tests in the follicular phase and then a battery of tests in the luteal phase. We see that menstrual cycle has no strong effect upon exercise performance. No evidence to suggest that the menstrual cycle has an effect upon performance. Now, should be noticed, we need more high quality research. It's difficult research to do, and there is something called the Feminine project going on at the moment, which is the first kind of really high quality, multi-center, gold standard test or study for this question. But as it stands, it is not a scientifically correct stance to say that the menstrual cycle affects performance. You cannot say that with a strong evidence behind it. But here's the dilemma. When you talk to athletes, some of the research we've done, when we survey athletes, we see that they tell us, well, it definitely affects my performance. I perceive it. I feel like doing worse. But it's highly individual. As you said, some people say, oh, I feel really crappy here, and some people feel I feel great, and vice versa. And then they're like, well, some months I feel better than others, and it varies. So if you have this issue then, picture yourself, me as a researcher. You have people tell you, oh, the menstrual cycle impacts my performance. They get tested in the lab and it does not impact their performance. What do you conclude?
It's a mental thing.
It's all in their head?
No, as in, no.
Her words. Her words.
No, you're twisting what I'm saying. That like some months you can feel good and more you can't. And it depends on more than just the actual hormone stuff. It's to do what you're doing in your life as well, like how your life is affecting it, as in maybe with work and stuff like that. And then if you're having a hard day at work, it affects you more, and that's one thing about the mental stuff. That's true.
No, I apologise, I pick on someone with that. I lead someone into that every talk, so thanks. It's usually a man I lead into it, but there's none here tonight. And usually they turn bright red and we have a good laugh at them. It's not probably a nice thing to do, but you have to get your kick somewhere. But this is the issue we see. We see these, what we call inter and inter-individual. That just means between people and then within people, within an individual. So we see this massive difference, because you think of what would we try to do in research? We try to take a group of people, get an average result for that group, test them again, get an average result. And there's no statisticians in the room, is there? No, okay. So some conferences you go to, there are statisticians, and that's when you panic, because they're a different breed of people. Anyone that's a full-time statistician. But basically what we do with research, when we look at stats, we compare means obviously, but we compare variance. And if it's these variances are tight enough, we can detect a difference. It's very hard to get a statistical significant difference when there's huge amounts of variation in your sample. So you think of it, if we have a load of women in, and they're all drastically different, and then even from cycle to cycle, they're different within themselves. You have so much variation, you're not going to find a difference on a group level. So to say that the evidence today shows that the menstrual cycle on a group level does not impact performance, that's not to say on an individual level it doesn't, but there is no blanket uniform that we can say, oh, the follicular phase, most women are worse or better. We don't have the evidence to say that. And the problem then as well, we think of menstrual cycle, and you've a lot of these menstrual cycle apps that you put in the day you bleed, and that's pretty much it. If it's more advanced, you might put in when you ovulate then as well. And it predicts that these curves are happening. So, for example, we know if the period is occurring, more than likely we've low levels of both hormones. How would we know that we got the estrogen spike in the follicular phase? What does this coincide with? Ovulation. So if we have an ovulation strip or ovulation test and it's positive, we kind of infer, okay, there must have been that rise in estrogen to cause a luteinizing hormone, an LH surge that occurs there. And we would expect it falls back down. So there's a difference between naturally menstruating. If someone is just having a period, that means they're naturally menstruating, but we don't know that they're eumenorrheic. Eumenorrheic is a natural menstrual cycle with ovulation occurring. So unless we confirm ovulation, we can't say that they're eumenorrheic. But then you can have ovulation, but you mightn't get this progesterone spike. How do we confirm that, do you think? The progesterone. That's a blood test. So if we were working with a group of athletes and say we were trying to confirm their menstrual profile, we would need to be doing urine tests to confirm that the ovulation is occurring. We need to be doing blood tests to confirm this is occurring. We would be tracking when they bleed and the length of bleeding and the cycle length. And ideally, you're getting blood tests throughout it if you have the resources to properly do it, and you're doing that over months. That's not practical for most people to do to confirm that. And interestingly enough, you assume, oh, you have a 28-day cycle, that this is happening. Well, interesting paper, and it's a bit difficult to see. These are all the spikes where ovulation occurred with different women that all had a 28-day cycle. So they all bled at the same time and had the same cycle length, but some people had a 7-day follicular phase and 21-day luteal phase. Some people are opposite, had a 3-week follicular and then a 7-day luteal. Very few fell bang in the middle. So you think of these apps are saying, well, this is your menstrual cycle, this is your follicular and luteal, this is how you should train and feel in your follicular. Where if you're that person, or if you're this person, it's telling you you're in follicular here, but you're not. Your follicular is over since the 7th day. So you've so much variation between people and within people. And if you did that over months, it mightn't be the same for the woman month on month. So then how can you go and give a blanket recommendation across everyone based upon a lack of evidence? And when you look at all these profiles, there's so many different profiles. So when we look at kind of menstrual cycle phase and that hormonal environment and whether it has an impact upon performance, which it hasn't been shown to date, if the evidence does come out, what would we expect to see? Would we expect to see from this Feminine project, this really expensive, really difficult study to do, that there's a blanket uniform effect, that oh, we've shown it, follicular phase people are down, luteal phase people are, or vice versa? Or would we expect that, it kind of varies a lot from between individuals and within individuals? And that's why Kirsty Elliott-Sale, a colleague of mine, pretty much, she's from Louth originally, a professor over in Manchester, world leader in this area. I joked with her that her study's not going to make a blind bit of difference. They're going to spend a load of money, spend a lot of resources, and it won't change anything, which she kind of concurred. And the same thing is with phase-based training. We cannot give these blanket recommendations based upon what we think the hormones do in theory, because it's nice in theory to think that the hormones do this, but it's just not that simple. So we shouldn't view these fluctuations in estrogen and progesterone as some sort of surrogate measure for how people will adapt. So you shouldn't be basing your training or your nutritional approaches on this. So yeah, we do need more research in this area, as always, and phase-based training, when examined to date, hasn't been shown to be any better than a traditional approach. Now, it hasn't been really bad, like in terms of, it's not that it doesn't work, it just doesn't work better than just ignoring the phases and training through. So, and for me, I think it just puts another barrier up in front of people. We don't have enough women's strength training, and now we say, oh, you need to time it around your menstrual cycle and everything. It's just another barrier to put up. So, at present, you can't advocate for it based on evidence to say that's a better way of approaching things. And then hormonal contraceptives. What percentage of population use hormonal contraceptives? A female population. That's post-menarche, the beginning onset of menses, and before menopause.
50, just under 50%.
Yeah? I must tell Helen now the course was very informative. So, yeah, we looked at a couple of years ago, now 2 or 3 years ago, in athletes in rugby and strength athletes. It's about 40 to 50%. I think we found 51 point something percent. I should know, it's my own paper, I should know that. But on average, depending on the population, we see that, especially in the younger cohorts, we have about half, you could say, of our athletic individuals on the contraceptive pill. The oral contraceptive pill being the most popular. The coil is actually becoming increasingly more popular, just anecdotally from what I'm hearing, because we're recruiting for a study. In the moment, I've some final year students doing a study on menstrual cycle phase and contraceptives, and they're really struggling to recruit college girls that are on the pill. Said they're all on the coil, so that's just anecdotal. Might be a changing in trend. But this, what annoys me is when people always talk about all the focus on the menstrual cycle, where that ignores probably half your population. Because if you're on an oral contraceptive or on a hormonal contraceptive, you don't have a menstrual cycle. We're putting in a synthetic estrogenic component and a progestin, then depending on the formulation, and you put exogenous hormones into the body, your natural production shuts off. So it used to be a case that doctors would advocate that people go on the pill for 21 days and then have 7 pill-free days. A lot are just recommending that you go straight through now and don't really come off. But when athletes would come off for those 7 pill-free days, they would have a bleed, and they would conflate that to think it's a period, but that's just a withdrawal bleed. It's not the same. So that's one of the issues with contraceptive use potentially, is if athletes don't understand that that's just a withdrawal bleed, and they're being told, oh, you know, if you undereat and you lose your period or something that can be a warning sign, athletes can be like, oh, well, I have a period every month. But it's not, it's just them coming off the pill. So it's just something to be aware of. And that does happen when, say, athletes I'd work with, especially in a team environment, when we send out screening forms and health questionnaires at the start of the season, they'll tell me the pill they're on, but then they'll also tell me about their that they're having a regular menstrual cycle. So they're ticking both boxes on the questionnaire, which can't be right. So it's just something to be aware of. But we had there was this idea that, you know, the pill could affect your performance or how you adapt to exercise. And it's this idea, well, if the menstrual cycle is really anabolic and you're suppressing estrogen for a time, well, maybe you're losing out. But we had a look at the evidence on this, and thankfully the evidence to date shows that the pill does not affect gains from the gym. So whether that's increase in muscle size, strength, or power. And again, I gave out the last time that graphs are horrible, and this is one that I produced personally. So I'll apologize, but this is what we have to do. This just is very hard to see, but it's what we call a forest plot. So this is where we just look at all the papers that have examined this question, and if they said that the pill was damaging, they'd be right over here. If they said it was favourable for gains, it'd be right over here. They pretty much all fall in the middle. So the body of evidence kind of agrees that the pill doesn't have an effect one way or another when it comes to muscle gain or strength gain or power gain following. Now, interestingly, no research has looked at any other form of contraceptive. They've only looked at the oral contraceptive pill. So when we look at injection, coil, non-hormonal IUDs, none of this stuff, we didn't have an issue. And again, just an anecdote, well, I do forget I'm on camera. Usually I'd have a slide up there where I explain what all the different contraceptive forms are. Didn't think I'd need to do that tonight, but we all know what an IUD looks like. I had a 4th year physiology female student explain to me how an IUD works. What do you think she told me when I was like, how does it work? She told me, she's like, oh, well, it goes up and it blocks the fallopian tube and then nothing can get in or out. So she just looked at the shape. She's like, that's how it works. And I was like, okay, the education system is well and truly broken. But you get some mad things. Males and females, do they respond differently to exercise?
Yes.
In what way?
Their strength and their size.
What about it?
Then get bigger and stronger.
Okay, let's have a look. So, maybe not really, I think, is the fair. So, strength. Interestingly enough, and we're doing an updated analysis of this because that's something I struggle to. When we look at the body of evidence, and this study included 50 different papers to looked at, when you give males and females the same strength training program, they gain strength and muscle at the same rate. Relative rate. That's important to acknowledge. Relative rate. You remember at the start we looked at male and female difference and we see 40% less muscle mass, 50% less strength. So it's the same relative rate. So you think of if males say are benching, let's say 100 kg for simple maths, and females can bench 50 kg. You give them a program, both of them increase 10%. The males go from 100 to 110, females go from 50 to 55. So people say, oh, males get stronger. Well, relatively they got the same. So it's the difference between absolute. We see the same in muscle mass. Now, what I will say is, my suspicion is all the studies have looked at this are over kind of a couple of months, 16 weeks, maybe 24 weeks. In that first 4 to 6 months, they gain at the same rate. I think as time goes on, males probably keep gaining and females potentially slow down. And the reason I say that is anecdotally, you see a lot of skinny guys that end up getting really big. Doesn't seem to just happen with female athletes. They seem to get to a nice kind of plateau after a while and they'll keep getting stronger, but the muscle mass, so I do think on the muscle mass side of things there is probably a limiting factor. But based on the evidence, and this is one of the things that when you look at the data is actually a nice finding, because if you think of all the strength training protocols were designed examining men for men, well, if you're saying, oh, well, they're male programs, if you give them to women, they respond just as well. They don't respond less favorably. Because people will say, oh, you should have, anyone here like female-specific strength and conditioning or female-specific programs? Yeah, I hear this, and then I ask someone, I'll often do this, I'll say, who thinks that females should follow female-specific strength and conditioning programs or exercise programs? And a few people put up their hands, and I ask them to define what that is, and they've no definition for it. So we'll get into that, but we see that females do just as well. Now, whatever a female-specific program looks like, maybe they can do even better, but there's no reason to think that they'll do any worse. With endurance, and again, I've just some links in here to a lot of words there, but basically, we do see slight differences between males and females when it comes to endurance training, this kind of sexual dimorphism. And basically what it shows is if you give males and females the same training dose, males seem to increase in VO2 max a bit better, this aerobic thing. So it just might mean that females have to do a bit more work to get the same increase, but it's probably down to that difference in that hemoglobin concentration and that ability to increase VO2 max. All right, so chip. This is it's actually not a bad resemblance now. I've let the beard grow a bit longer, so I'm probably close to Chip. This is how I spend a lot of my time. It's a good embodiment of me confused and bluffing. You just have to stay one lecture ahead of the students. Never forget that if you want to get into lecturing. We'll cut that from the thing. DCU cannot know that. But we get to this stage, and this is where people are probably more confused about what to do. And it can be a bit defeatist where people are like, oh, well, you know, won't adapt and this kind of thing. How predictive is the response to exercise? Did we cover this last night, no? No, good. How predictive? So if I give you all the same programs, or even I give you an exercise program, how well can I predict how you'll respond? Kind of generally?
If we all actually do it.
Yeah.
All of that.
If I give you all, and let's say you do it, and I'm like, okay, you're going to increase 10%, you'll increase 15. I kind of know, okay, they'll all probably get better, but I don't know who'll get the most or and like, if someone says they can, they're lying. When I do an exercise program or work with athletes, I write a program that I think will get them somewhere. It's my best estimate of how I think is the best approach to use. Same with coaching, anyone that coaches, that's what you do. It's like, I think this is the best thing to do, and then I try it and, that didn't work. Now I need to pivot and go another way. But when we look at humans, this is a very interesting study. So again, this graph is people, how they responded to pretty much 6 months of strength training. I can't remember which is which. The black is males and the grey is females, or vice versa. If they're line, and each line is one of the 287 people. If they're below the line, they got weaker, or they lost muscle, in this graph. So imagine training for 6 months hard and then losing muscle. And as you can see, some people gained a load, really high responders. Some people are what we call these low responders. Most of us, by definition, are average, because most people are average. You're not allowed to tell people that anymore for some reason, but by definition, most of us are average. And we're going to be somewhere in the middle here. What's interesting though, when you look at the kind of sex split, some of the highest responders were female. Some of the lowest responders were female. Some of the highest were male, some of the highest or lowest were male as well. So even within that, you could say, men might respond better. Well, these men didn't. These women are off the charts different, and that's just genetics. It's reality. People think, all you need is hard work. No. If you don't have good genetics, you're not going to be an Olympian, no matter how hard you work. If my passion was basketball, that's not happening. So, you kind of have to deal with the reality that's there. From a health perspective though, more luckily, less low responders when it comes to strength. Pretty much everyone will gain strength reasonably well. If you are unlucky to be one of these people down here, it just means you need to do more. You need to just train a bit more of a magnitude of a response to stimulate you. You're a bit resistant to that response. Anyone ever do something called a Wingate test by any chance? A Wingate test? So everyone's seen the VO2 max test where you put a mask on someone, run them in a treadmill, run like for 8-9 minutes, get them to exhaustion. I would do that all day, every day, rather than do a Wingate that is only 30 seconds. A Wingate lasts 30 seconds. And I had TY students in last week, and they were like, how can 30 seconds of exercise be that hard? He found out. That took the wind out of his sails a little bit. But essentially, we put you on a bike, we get you up to pedaling as fast as you can, and then we drop 7.5% of your body weight onto the wheel, and you have to go 30 seconds all out as hard as you can. Doesn't sound that hard. It's the one test we always have a bucket ready for. People usually do get sick afterwards. And it's usually this get off the bike, like, that wasn't too bad. And we're like, have a seat. And they're like, no, I'm feeling fine. And then 5 minutes later, you see them turn grey, and we see it. So it's just really high. It's all that lactate builds up and then flushes out. So not nice.
So what's that test for?
A Wingate, that's anaerobic capacity. So looking at your anaerobic capacity. But sprint interval training is where we use the Wingate as a training method, essentially, in some of these sprint tests, where you do that, rest a few minutes, do it again, rest a few minutes, do it again. Quite torturous. These individuals, again, you see it in aerobic exercise. Some people did that for a few weeks and their VO2 max went down. They got less fit. Now, if you want to discourage people from ever exercising, that's how you do it. You put them through that and then tell them, you've gotten worse. But we see this, what we call heterogeneity of response, difference. But that's just a basic principle of training, individuality. Everyone will respond differently. We give them a stimulus, not everyone responds differently. And we know that because if adaptation was so highly predictive, then we wouldn't need coaches. AI, you just write it. It's simple. Or we'd write one perfect program and send it out there. So just because there are differences, on average between males and females, between individuals, it doesn't mean that it's, destined to go a certain way. There is this individuality. So hopefully we'll start to wrap it up now. So to summarize, no strong evidence menstrual cycle has an effect on performance at a group level. If it does, it's highly variable between individuals. And just what you were saying was, And this is where I have to be very, very careful in my wording. When you said it's all in their head,
I didn't say it, but I was saying.
when I perceived that you said it's all in their head.
There's man's answers. I can tell you, women put up with a lot more hardship generally.
Oh, I know.
It takes a lot more for them to recognise pain.
Oh, yes, that's important.
Then that's when the mental stuff comes in. You're having a bad day, that's when you go down and you're on the right, wrong, girls.
I'm outnumbered, and I would hope I have the reasonable common sense. I should have put this projector that side because I have no clear exit. And I'm definitely too short to go out that window. But when we can get into the kind of how performance is affected, if it is affected, it is a psychological thing more than likely. And you can't separate physiology and psychology. Like a great example, what's your name again? Pauline? Pauline, I'm going to get you to come up here and talk for 60 seconds about whatever your favourite movie is and why we should all go home and watch it tonight. Okay. No, I'm not going to do that. But Pauline, nothing physically has happened. Pauline's face is probably becoming red, heart rate's up, blood pressure. So there's a strong physiological response to a psychological stimuli. So psychology and physiology can't separate them. So it's grand. I pick on audiences. It's how I deal with my insecurity and lack of tallness. But so the physiology does impact, or the psychology can impact physiology. And vice versa, physiology, hormones, that's common sense. We know anyone that's gone on HRT, anyone that's gone on contraceptive pills, anyone that's used anabolic steroids. You put hormones into the body, or hormones do have an effect upon mood and different psychological processes. What we do see is we can bring people into the lab at different times and test them, and objectively, their muscles produce the same amount of force, their same performances are there. You ask them, how do you feel? They're like, that felt heavy, that felt harder. So the rate of perceived exertion, or how you perceive something to be, can fluctuate. So your body is capable of producing the same output, but it feels harder. And we all know that in terms of a day you're in a bad mood, a run, it's tougher. You're more sensitive to the pain, the discomfort, versus being in a good mood. So, and from a performance perspective, it doesn't matter if that's a psychological or physiological. If something feels harder, well, that's your objective reality then. It is harder. Because when you're on a pitch, you don't not make the run because you physically can't. You don't because I'm exhausted, I just can't push myself to do it again. So that's where the psychology does come into effect. So even if it's the menstrual cycle having an effect, it's more than likely not at the level of the muscle. It's more than likely having a psychological effect that's affecting how we appraise things. And when you get into that kind of biopsychosocial model of pain and effort, it gets very complex in terms of, I won't go too much down it, but you're right, your mood can affect like that. If you're in pain, in a bad mood, the pain is worse than if you're in a good mood. And then how the example I always give about how complex pain is. If I always have a pain in my arm here, say it's throbbing, does that mean that there's something wrong somewhere in there? At a tissue level, that there must be bone, ligament, tendon, or there must be something wrong in there?
Yeah.
You would agree? Anyone else agree?
Not necessarily.
Why?
You could defer pain.
What's that mean?
There could be something wrong with your neck, you're getting pain in your...
Okay, well say that there's something wrong though, that there is what we...
That's what your brain's telling you.
Yeah.
That there is something if you feel
Yeah.
it. So, no.
I can have a pain in an arm that I don't have. I can lose that arm and be lying awake at night with the pain in an arm, a phantom limb pain, and it's excruciating for individuals, in an arm I don't have. So this is where I'm talking about the complexity of your brain is perceiving pain in something you don't even have. So this idea that, oh, there's pain there, therefore there must be something wrong with the tissue, and we see this, people can have back pain because they hate their job, not because there's something wrong with their back. You know what I mean? It's these kind of, our mood or our psychology can influence our perception of physiology. So that's why it gets very interesting. And if you want to go down a complete rabbit hole, look up something called sham surgeries, where anyone ever have elbow tendonitis? or something like that. So it used to be that they'd expose the tendon and scrape it, is what the practice for it was. And then they did a study where they opened the tendon, and in some individuals, the surgeon was handed a letter and it either said, continue as normal, scrape the tendon, or close up and don't do anything to the tendon. And that's what we call a sham surgery. People thought they were getting the surgery, didn't get it. Now, they were told that they might get either or, they weren't. This wasn't now, you go in thinking you get it and no one's told you it didn't happen. But 2-year follow-up, no difference between people that got the surgery and didn't. So, yeah, it's placebo, it's the same thing. And even if you know it's a placebo, I tell you a placebo, it still works. It's what they call, again, patriarchy, the pink tax. You know what I mean? Nurofen for period pain is the exact same as Nurofen for headache. Nurofen actually got fined quite a lot of money in Australia for doing it. They had Nurofen for period pain, and it was the exact same pill. So they got done on advertising misconduct or something along like that. That said, you pay more if you buy the Nurofen for period pain. It is more effective than the Nurofen for headache, even though it's the exact same pill in the box. So, you mean psychological, and it's like that. Why do people buy brand like, you know, Panadol when you can buy real cheap paracetamol? Exact same thing. But you're like, and it's very good marketer Rory Sutherland will say, he's like, but no, I have a €3 headache. I don't have a 99-cent headache, and I'm willing to pay for it. And it is true. Humans are completely irrational. Do not ever convince yourself that humans are rational. We are irrational. We do what we want and then we post-rationalize why we did it. That is pretty much how humans work. So, I didn't finish, I only got onto the first one. So, contraceptive pill, not something you need to worry about when it comes to performance really, not having a major effect one way or another. Phase-based training, in theory, makes sense. In practice, no evidence to support it. And then adaptation to exercise is highly individual. So that brings us then to hopefully try to wrap it up. Do females need to train differently to males? And again, I might have talked about it last night. Why do we train? It's adaptation. And again, what is training? If I'm trying to sound smart with the students, this is what I would say. All training, all physical activity is muscle contraction. Whether we're running, whether we're lifting heavy, it's all down to muscle contraction. The adaptations we have, it's what they call the SAID principle. They're very specific to the stresses we put on it. If our body, we go and run a marathon versus we lift heavy weight, our bodies respond very differently. But it's all still muscle contraction. But it all boils down to how many contractions we're doing, so reps, how hard are those reps, you know, what percentage of our max are we working at, how often do we do it. So these stresses we put on the body will impose what kind of adaptations we have. So, people get obsessed with methods of training, where when I write a training program, I tend to flip it the other way, and I try to tell people to conceptualize from first principles. So, women are small men. No, women are not small men. I did, for that talk in Athlone, I was tempted to put men are not big women. And then I thought, no, we were launching a female specific module. I was like, not the time and place to put that out there. But the idea is, you know, women they're different, and we talk about the difference. If the physiology is different, you have to train differently. I don't think that holds true. So, we all know Sir Mo Farah, yeah? Grant. And then Sir Dave, we'll call him. Would we agree that my physiology is drastically different to that of Mo Farah? Yeah. Olympic level medalist, mediocre, overweight powerlifter. Slightly different physiology. Now, if Mo rang me up, this is an actual event that takes place in San Diego every year, the World Dog Surfing Championships. You and your dog get on a surfboard and go surfing. There is no more wholesome thing you can do in your life than that. I don't care, I won't. But Mo rings me up and he says, tell you what, Dave, we're going to pack in the running, you're going to stop lifting heavy stuff, and we're going to go do the Dog Surfing Championships. Would you say, oh, well, Mo is completely different physiology to David, he must train different for the Dog Surfing Championships? Maybe. But you wouldn't say, oh, because the physiology is different. What do? We do a needs analysis with anything we do. We would look at what's David's weaknesses and strengths, what's Mo's weaknesses and strengths, and essentially, you do what you do with anyone. You have them at a baseline level of fitness.
There's a level that they need to get to. This is where I need the required fitness. And you put a training program in place that gets you from baseline up. And that's it. And you wouldn't necessarily, you'd say, okay, well, the physiology might come into it, but it doesn't necessarily need to be different. If you found out that, the biggest requirements for surfing is probably balance. Mo probably doesn't have great balance. Anyone ever seen when you've gone onto that treadmill and split himself? Doesn't have great balance. If you've ever seen me ice skate, I do not have great balance. I'm quite top heavy, so once I lean one way, I'm gone. So you would say, no, two of them need to work on balance, need to do the same thing. So when I design a training program, the very first thing I think of is, what is the adaptation I'm trying to achieve? That's number one. That's the first thing I need to be clear on, and that's just, what's your goal? What's the goal of the program? Is there a sex dimension to adaptation? So adaptation, increase VO2 max, increase speed, power, strength, whatever. There's no sex dimension. They're the same for males and females. Once it comes next to that, then the next thing is, well, what are the principles that need to be in place? So if that's hypertrophy, an increase in muscle mass, that's progressive overload with high levels of mechanical tension. Basically, you need to lift heavy stuff, do it often, and lift heavier stuff over time. Again, no sex dimension. Principles are the same across sexes. Progression, individuality, recovery, the principles are the exact same. So the only thing that can potentially have a sex dimension or difference is the methods. Because this is how I design a program. It's like, what's my goal? What principles need to be applied? And then I say to myself, for this given individual with the resources I have, what's the best method of applying the principle that drives the adaptation? That's it. And you think, well, as coaches, as individuals, what do we manipulate with our exercise? Our volume, how much exercise we do, how hard it is, how often we do it, and the exercises, the actual movements that we do. Can anyone give me one of those that has to be different for women than men? Where you say, because they're women, it has to be fundamentally different. No? And that's the question I end up facing. I'm like, I can't make a strong argument. If I try to be devil's advocate, I try to murder my darlings, as they call it in literature, I can't do it. Based on the evidence, I don't think there's any strong reason that women need to train differently to men. Females respond similarly. I think there might be some nuances, but that's more in how we coach them rather than the actual technical elements. Because we see some of these ideas, women should do less weight, higher reps, well, just because you're better at something doesn't, and maybe even if women did respond better to that, if you're trying to increase maximal strength, there's no point using lightweight and doing loads of reps. The goal is still the goal. It's like me. I'm probably not a natural marathon runner. Well, probably not. I am not a natural marathon runner. I'm quite good at lifting heavy stuff off the ground. And when that's your hobby, that's quite strange. But if I wanted to run a marathon and I said, well, I'm really good, my physiology responds really well to lifting heavy stuff, that's how I'm going to train for the marathon, doesn't work well. Just because you're good at something doesn't mean that's the way you train. I would have to still train what I'm poorer at. But when we see that females, yes, potentially fatigue, or a bit more fatigue resistant in exercise, but then that's in kind of isometric based stuff, holding planks, holding wall sits. In dynamic exercise, doesn't seem to be the same. And also, fittest families, when they do the wall sit, who tends to last the longest in those? The lightest people. Females on average are lighter than males. And if you're in something like a plank or a wall sit, if you're lighter, you'd probably last longer. So if that was standardized to body weight, you mightn't see the same thing. And you don't see this idea, this recovery, but anecdotally we hear that females, when you work with athletes, they're just able to train more, handle more volume. They can do maybe 4 sessions a week, where the males will only do 3 or 2. The argument I make with a lot of these things is it a sex difference or an absolute load difference? So we know females on average have lower levels of strength, and we know that they don't get the same support in terms of training age. So they're not as well versed in the gym as their male counterparts because of societal structures. So if I'm lifting, 200 kilos, say, in a back squat, and that's 80% of my max, versus someone lifting 60% or 60 kilos, which is 80% of their max, even if we're lifting the same relative 80%, I can guarantee you 200 kilos on your back, that absolute load has a bigger difference. So, because as you see women get more trained and get stronger and stronger, their ability to do that high volume comes down, and that high frequency does come down. There's a guy not far from here, trains Northside Dublin, and he squats a little over 400 kilos, Jake Brennan. He is an enhanced lifter, and publicly about that. But he squats once every 2 weeks, because if he tries to squat any more than that, he just can't, because it's that absolute load on the body. So it does make a difference. Same, so with the frequency, a lot of this stuff, I argue, is it a sex difference or an absolute load difference? Now, we know exercise selection is the one place where people will kind of say, and it's where I taught as well, because we know the females on average 3 times more likely to rupture an ACL than males and certain tendon issues. And this is the current guidelines for preventing ACLs in female athletes. They follow a neuromuscular training program, so basically strength training program with coordination, targeting lower body strength, Nordics, lunges, calf raises, and landing stabilization, plyometrics, hopping, jumping, throughout their sport seasons. Good recommendation? Yeah, it's fine. I think it would be good. The only problem with it is, that's the exact same recommendation you give to a male athlete. So it's just good training practice. Because some of the things, if you said, like they're men, just do 8 sets of 7 reps, 72% for the best gains. They're tall, blue hair, full forward. They all sound ridiculous. But all of a sudden, if someone on social media says, they're women, so this is the exact way they should train, people are like, ooh, you go girl, female empowerment. And I'm like, that's just putting barriers in front of women. It just doesn't make sense logically. So that's to hopefully try to wrap up. Do females need to train differently? I would argue probably not, based upon the scientific literature to date. Now, I will say, what I've talked about so far is evidence-based. If I switch that a bit to the kind of empirical or anecdotal side, I did some research over the last couple of years where I interviewed the top coaches with different international rugby women's team and asked them, do they train women differently to men? And if so, why? And then linked that with some of my own experience. So, for example, I'm currently working with a senior women's inter-county team at the moment. When I go into a setup like that, what do I expect? These are some of the things I expect. Now, this is quite a successful senior football team at the county level. I suspect that they have low gym-based training age, that they haven't been in the gym that many years, if at all. And because of that, they have lower technical ability, both in the pitch in terms of running mechanics and then also gym-based movement. I suspect we'll have less resources, that we're not going to be as funded well. We'll have to fight for the gym, we'll have to fight for food after training. We'll have to fight for shorts for our first league match, but that's a bit suspicious. Cut that from the camera. We probably, anyone that was in the GA scene saw the news during the week. I will expect that because of societal differences, they're a bit more hesitant to lifting heavy weight and going a bit harder. And because of that, they'll have low intent. I spend most of my time going around the gym saying, put heavier weight on. And standing there at the end of a set, and I was like, did that feel hard? And they're like, yeah, I suppose. I was like, didn't look hard, go heavier. That's most of my time. I do expect they'll question me much more. In general, women, and again, these are generalizations, there's huge variation within everyone. But in general, I get asked a lot more questions. Male team, go do it, they don't question you to go off. Women say, why do I need to do that? Why? How does that help me on the pitch? And it's fine, you have to explain it a bit more, you need that buy-in. But it is much more enjoyable environment, I will give it that. But these are things that are not sex differences. These are because of what we'd call the gendered sport environment. It's less resources. They don't move as well because the lads get development squads from 12, 13 years of age and S&C up through that. The women get it at minor level. If they're lucky, it usually comes in at senior level. And even at that, it's not, they usually get cowboys, to be honest, that are not doing too much. So what do you do? This is to kind of wrap it up, whether you're coaching or whether you're looking after your own kind of things, the key takeaways. So, when we think about it, menstrual cycle, hormonal contraceptives. The worst thing people can do is make it all about the menstrual cycle. And people learn a few things about the menstrual cycle and then they go in and they get obsessed and start talking about it, and the athlete's like, I don't really care that much. But you create an environment with athletes or individuals can track it if they want, discuss it, and that's as simple as, I've gone into places, I'm like, how come you don't have tampons or pads in the toilets? I was like, that's all you need, put them in the toilet, and now it's okay, it's aware of it. And there is this idea that it's taboo in sport. I don't know. I haven't seen it much. I haven't been in any environment where people have any issue talking about it. It's taboo if you make it weird in general. Or maybe I'm just creeping them all out and I'm too intimidating for them to say anything yet. But when it comes to phase-based training, recognise there's no evidence base behind it as it stands. So you can't conclusively say that you should change training around the menstrual cycle at a group level. And also, interestingly, when we asked the top coaches if they'd consider it, they're like, how on earth would I even do it? You know what I mean? I have 30 or 40 different players, 30, 40 different cycles, half them are on contraceptives, the matches are when they are, and it's like, we're lucky if we just get into the gym, I can't then go doing that. Female specific program, I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that there needs to be massive sex difference. So, what you can do when supporting the athlete or supporting yourself. Biological sex is a factor, but it shouldn't be the big factor that we focus on. It's just one of many. I'm proud of this line. You steal this if you want, but trademark me in some way. We can't make recommendations to women, but we can make recommendations to a woman on an individual level. We can work on an individual level. Because what can we do? We can, as I say, we can have an environment that, okay, you're interested in seeing does your menstrual cycle affect your performance. Let's track it over a couple of months. Let's identify, is there any patterns emerging? You're like, oh, okay, this seems to be a consistent pattern every month. That, say, for example, the cramp in the couple of days for the period, but then we look at the patterns like, oh, but you also have night sweats as one of your PMS symptoms. Maybe we increase the electrolyte and hydration focus in the week before, because that's probably influencing the cramping. And we put it in, it might work, it mightn't. That process of working with an individual and like trying to identify patterns and putting in coping strategies, we do have a word for that. Anyone know the word? That system? That's just coaching. That's all that is. And that's the joke I made to, what I said to Kirsty. I was like, your massive study, which is needed, because the region said she wants to do it, is, to put this to bed. She's like, that's it, we've done it as good as it can be done, and let's move on to more important stuff. But they'll find that it's individual between individuals, so what will that mean to practice? Absolutely nothing. It'll mean the recommendations that come out as track the individual, identify patterns if there is any, and put in individual coping strategies. That's just coaching. So this is the table I always kind of share at the end and update in terms of where we are, and it's a nice kind of reference point that you can have. Physiology. Males and females are very different, and that affects performance. Strong evidence. Menstrual cycle. No strong evidence a menstrual cycle phase has an effect. More evidence needed, but the best thing we can do is tell people, track it, identify patterns, put in strategies if they are there. Similar with contraceptives, track it. See, is your pill affecting your performance on an individual level? People will need to try different contraceptives, or contraceptives don't work for some people because there's a lot of symptoms associated with them, but track it over time, identify individual patterns. When it comes to programming, actually writing the programs, there may be some slight difference between males and females, but nothing that makes a difference on a hugely practical level. So I don't think there's a massive difference for like male programs versus female programs. And then this phase-based training, theoretically plausible, no evidence to support it's better at the moment. So what I say to people is, experiment with it if you want, try it. If it works, great, but it's not something that you need to be doing, because again, we don't have enough girls and women doing strength and conditioning, doing strength training. So if they say, oh, I want to start training, it's like, okay, but you need to train this way for the first 2 weeks of your cycle, you need to do this, and that's just putting up barriers and making things more complicated. And I think that does summarise. Okay, that brings us towards the end.
Thank you.
Mic drop. Okay. Questions? Have I offended anyone yet? No, I've made it through another night, thank God. Thank God.